Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
Cold. That was the first thing Captain Cade felt. Not the gentle chill of morning frost or the brisk bite of winter air, but a bone-deep cold that seemed to have crystallized his very blood. A wail of sirens clawed at his consciousness, dragging him from the darkness of oblivion into painful awareness. His eyes snapped open, vision blurred by frost patterns etching the inside of his cryopod's glass canopy. The display above him pulsed with crimson urgency. Through the layer of ice, he could make out the words that would forever divide his life into before and after. System error. Time elapsed. 312 years. 4 months, 17 days. 300 years. The number refused to settle in his mind, bouncing around like shrapnel inside his skull. 3 centuries lost to the void. Everyone he'd ever known, gone to dust. Elena. Her name burst into his consciousness like a wound reopening, his final memory before the cryosleep. Her voice over the comm system of her ship, the Valiant. "Cade, they've locked on to us. I can't shake." Her words cut short by the screech of tearing metal as the ghost stealth fighter tore through her vessel. The transmission had ended in static, and part of him had died with her. He clenched his fists, knuckles white with rage. The ghost had taken everything from him. His future, his love, his humanity. 300 years hadn't erased this pain. It had crystallized it, made it perfect and sharp like a diamond blade in his chest. "I'm coming for you," he whispered, his voice hoarse from centuries of disuse. "This time, I finish what we started." Yet even through the haze of vengeance, another voice spoke in his mind, the voice of duty. Captain Aaron Cade, Special Operations, 3rd Fleet, a soldier with a mission, the last soldier of a war long forgotten, but not ended, not while the ghost still lived. His final orders echoed in his memory. Find and eliminate the enemy operative, codenamed Ghost, at any cost. Those orders, received from Admiral Thornton himself, had been absolute. Duty demanded he complete his mission, regardless of the time that had passed. A soldier's oath didn't expire, not even after 3 centuries. Cade's training took over before despair could paralyze him. He balled his hand into a fist and struck the thin ice on the glass. It shattered with a sound like breaking dreams. Beyond lay the bridge of his fighter, the Avenger, once a pinnacle of military engineering, now a broken shell. Systems flickered weakly, some consoles dark entirely, but it had survived just like him. He was here, on Kerber 7, the graveyard planet, the final resting place for the machines of war. His squadron had come here to hunt down and eliminate the Ghost, an elusive assassin of the Xian race, the last remaining enemy of the Great War. His final mission, interrupted by the cold sleep that had claimed 3 centuries of his life. Cade's muscles screamed as he forced himself to move, climbing out of the cryopod with the awkward movements of the newly born. His uniform, once pristine, hung from his frame in tatters. The fighter's hull had been breached in places, allowing the planet's atmosphere to seep in, breathable but thin and metallic on his tongue. He stumbled to the fractured viewport. Outside, as far as the eye could see, stretched a metallic hell. The mangled husks of thousands of ships, both human and Xian, lay under the dim light of a distant star. Behemoths of stellar warfare rested at odd angles, their broken spines reaching toward the colorless sky. Fighter crafts, not unlike his own, were scattered like discarded toys among the giants. This was where the war had ended, while he slept. As he surveyed the landscape, he noticed the smaller tragedies frozen in time. 100 meters away, a fighter craft similar to his own sat embedded in the metallic soil. In its cockpit, the skeletal remains of its pilot still clutched the control yoke, as if even death couldn't break the determination to complete one final maneuver. Further on, a transport vessel lay split open like a broken egg, its contents spilled across the ground. Among the debris, he spotted a small, dust-covered object, a child's stuffed animal, its synthetic fur bleached by centuries of exposure to the harsh environment. This place wasn't just a graveyard for machines. It was a monument to millions of interrupted lives, to dreams and hopes silenced in an instant. Each wreck told a story that would never be completed. His last directive burned in his memory like a brand. Find and destroy the Ghost. But now it wasn't just duty that drove him. It was vengeance. For Elena, for himself, for all those who had died while he slept. He checked his personal sidearm, still holstered at his hip, and retrieved his tactical rifle from its wall mount. "Duty and vengeance," he murmured, checking his weapon with practiced hands. For once, they aligned perfectly. He was a soldier with a mission, yes, but more than that, he was a man with a purpose. "Still alive after all this time," he whispered. "Let's finish this." Kerber 7 was a perfect hiding place for someone who didn't want to be found. A labyrinth of rusting metal and perpetual shadow, the graveyard stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. Ships of all sizes created a chaotic landscape of twisted corridors, collapsed hulls, and exposed innards. Cade began the hunt with methodical precision. Duty was his compass now, the mission parameters etched into his mind with military clarity. His tactical visor, though outdated by whatever passed for technology these days, still functioned well enough to scan for signs of life and movement. For the first day, he found nothing but dust and silence. Then on the second day, he discovered the first clue. A terminal on an ancient cruiser, its systems hacked and repurposed. The coding language was unmistakably Xeon, elegant, complex, almost musical in its structure. But something about it seemed deliberate, as if it had been left for him to find. When he activated the terminal, a holographic display flickered to life. On it, a chess problem glowed with soft blue light, an old tactical exercise from his academy days. It was the kind of problem they used to separate the tacticians from the cannon fodder. A complex scenario with multiple solutions, but only one optimal path. "A trap?" he murmured, studying the pieces. "Number and invitation." The ghost was testing him. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. It was a verification. And suddenly, Cade felt a flicker of doubt creep into his mind. His orders had been clear. Eliminate the enemy. But an enemy wouldn't leave puzzles. An enemy wouldn't be testing his identity. An enemy would simply kill. He pushed the thought aside. Duty first. Questions later. He solved the puzzle, fingers moving through the holographic pieces with practiced ease. As soon as he completed it, the terminal flashed and displayed coordinates to another location in the ship graveyard. As days passed, Cade followed this trail of breadcrumbs. Each location contained another test. A complex encryption that only an intelligence officer of his era would recognize. A power routing problem that required intimate knowledge of pre-war starship design. A tactical simulation of the Battle of Proxima Centauri, where Cade himself had commanded the right flank. She wasn't running. She was testing him, verifying his identity through challenges only the real Captain Cade could solve. She was leading him through his own past, his own knowledge. "You want me to find you," he said aloud, his voice echoing in the cavernous space of a derelict engine room. "But only when you're certain who I am." With each puzzle he solved, the conflict within him deepened. His duty, his orders demanded he eliminate the ghost. But his training, his instincts told him something was very wrong with this picture. The ghost was behaving like an ally, not an enemy. And somewhere deep inside, a voice that sounded uncomfortably like his own conscience whispered, "What if duty and honor don't align?" The final puzzle led him to the command bridge of the giant dreadnought Leviathan. The ship was a monument to human engineering, a city-sized vessel designed to carry thousands of crew members and enough firepower to level continents. Now it lay broken, its spine severed, but the command bridge was intact, a bubble of civilization in the chaos. As Cade solved the last encryption, a command code known only to officers of his rank and clearance, he heard a soft movement behind him. He turned swiftly, rifle raised. She stood there, a tall figure in charcoal black armor that seemed to absorb the meager light rather than reflect it. Through a shattered panoramic viewport behind her, the stars cast her in silhouette. She hadn't been cornered. She had been waiting for him. "You passed all my tests, Captain." A melodic voice emanated from her helmet. "You truly are who I hoped you'd be." Cade kept his rifle centered on her chest, his finger hovering near the trigger. Duty demanded he pull it. 300 years of military discipline screamed at him to complete his mission. Elena's final cry echoed in his memory, but something held him back. A soldier's intuition, perhaps, or something deeper. "Game over, Ghost," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "You've hunted your last." She turned with a fluid grace that spoke of enhanced reflexes. Through the narrow slit of her helmet, Two eyes burned like twin stars, calm and calculating. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they regarded each other, predator and prey, though Cade couldn't be certain which was which. The fight erupted with explosive suddenness. She moved like quicksilver, her blade, a curved, single-edged weapon of Xeon design, singing through the air with deadly precision. Cade countered with his combat knife, the two metals meeting in a shower of sparks that illuminated the dead consoles and dust-covered chairs around them. Every instinct, every reflex honed by years of combat training urged him to eliminate the threat. This was the enemy, the ghost who had haunted the nightmares of the human fleet. This was his duty, to complete his mission, to honor his oath as a soldier. They danced a lethal waltz among the relics of a forgotten war. She was fast, inhumanly so, but Cade had experience on his side. He had fought her kind before, knew their patterns, their weaknesses. For every strike she launched, he had a counter. For every feint, he remained unmoved. A swift kick to her wrist sent her blade spinning away into the shadows. Before she could recover, he tackled her to the ground, the impact driving the breath from both their lungs. They grappled on the cold metal floor, a tangle of limbs in desperation. With a final explosive effort, Cade pinned her beneath him, his knife at her throat. "It's time," he growled, his free hand moving to the latches on her helmet. Time to unmask the enemy. Time to see the face of the being who had eluded the entire human fleet for so long. Time to complete his mission. And in that moment, his world turned upside down. She didn't resist. Instead, her gloved hand shot to a panel on her wrist. Her tactical interface flashed onto Cade's own helmet visor, and he saw his own vital signs. Pulse, blood pressure, oxygen levels, all monitored with a precision that made military medical systems look primitive. But there was more. A line of data that made his blood freeze. DNA compatibility, 99.8%, and beneath it, a designation he'd never seen before. Protocol Guardian. "Your cryo-sleep was unstable, Captain." Her voice, calm and melodic, echoed in his helmet. The sound of it sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. "I have been maintaining it remotely for the last 312 years. Cade froze, his mind refusing to process the information. The knife at her throat wavered, then fell away entirely. She hadn't just been monitoring him. She was somehow genetically linked to his survival. His duty, once so clear, now blurred into uncertainty. If she had wanted him dead, he would have perished centuries ago. In that same instant, the Leviathan's systems roared to life around them. Lights that had been dark for centuries flickered on. External turrets swiveled with mechanical precision, opening fire on unseen targets in orbit. "Protocol Purge activated," a message read on his display, the words as ominous as they were unexpected. "They're here," she said, and for the first time Cade detected an emotion in her voice. Fear. "And they've come for you." In that moment, duty became a distant, hollow thing. What was a soldier's oath compared to this revelation? What was a 3-century-old mission against the reality that this supposed enemy had preserved his life for reasons he couldn't yet comprehend? They found shelter in the bowels of the Leviathan, in a maintenance bay that had been sealed against the vacuum of space when the ship was torn apart. Emergency lights cast a ghostly blue glow over the cramped space, transforming shadows into lurking threats. "Who's here?" Cade demanded, his weapon trained on her as she moved with practiced efficiency around the small room, activating systems and checking readouts on a portable terminal. His soldier's instincts hadn't abandoned him, even as his sense of duty wavered. "What is Protocol Purge?" She paused, her back to him. Then with deliberate slowness, she raised her hands to her helmet. The sound of pressure seals releasing hissed in the quiet. She removed the helmet, and Cade found himself staring at the back of her head, covered not in scales or chitinous plates as he had expected, but in a cascade of silver-white hair that fell past her shoulders. When she turned to face him, Cade's breath caught in his throat. He had expected a warrior's face, hard-edged, scarred, the face of an enemy he could hate. But beneath the helmet was the face of a young woman, beautiful by any standard, human or otherwise. Her skin was a soft blue like the sky on a clear summer day. Her eyes, large and expressive, were a deeper shade of the same color, framed by delicate silver markings that traced the contours of her face. Yet it wasn't her beauty that struck him most deeply. It was the profound weariness etched into features that should have been youthful. Her eyes held the weight of centuries, of loneliness, of a burden carried far too long. She wasn't a monster. She was a prisoner, chained to her mission for 300 years. In that moment, all his training, all his sense of duty, all his vengeance seemed hollow. How could he fulfill his mission against someone who had preserved his life for centuries? How could he hate this being who looked at him not with malice, but with hope? "My name is Seraphina," she said, her voice even more melodic without the helmet's distortion. "And they are the ones who want us both dead." She activated her terminal, and a holographic display sprang to life between them. Cade saw moments from his past, missions he had barely survived. A sniper shot that had deflected a millimeter from his head. An ambush thwarted by what he had thought was a random explosion. A retreat covered by what had been reported as a meteor shower. Behind every one of his miracles, there she was. A shadow in the background, manipulating events from afar. Her fleet of phantom ships, controlled via her neural interface, had been his invisible shield. "I don't understand," Cade said, lowering his weapon as confusion overwhelmed his sense of duty. "You're the ghost. You're supposed to be the enemy. Why would you protect me?" Seraphina's expression darkened. "My people, the Xeon, were not destroyed by you," she explained, her fingers dancing over the terminal to bring up more visuals. "They were destroyed by those who secretly sold weapons to both sides. The Omnicorp. They created a virus that killed us and blamed it all on me, on the ghosts to cover their tracks." Cade listened, and the world he knew crumbled to dust. The Great War, the conflict that had defined his entire existence, had been manufactured by corporate greed. Millions of lives, both human and Xeon, sacrificed on the altar of profit. His duty, his oath, his entire career, all based on a lie. "You were on a ship that scanned our world the day it fell," she continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I hope that your ship's logs, your memory held the proof. That's why I protected you. You were my last hope." The weight of her words settled over Cade like a shroud. In her eyes, he saw not an enemy, but a mirror of his own loss. She had lost her world. He had lost his time. Both victims of the same deception. "And now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The question was more than it seemed. It was about their immediate survival, yes, but also about his path forward. What was a soldier without a valid mission? What was duty when based on lies? "Now," she replied, closing the holographic display with a gesture, "we survive. And maybe, if we're very lucky, we find justice. Justice. Not vengeance. Not duty. Something higher. Something that transcended both." For the first time since awakening in this alien future, Cade felt a new purpose forming within him. Not the cold comfort of duty, but something warmer, more human. The honor of doing what was right, not just what was ordered. They needed to get one of her phantom ships airborne to survive and fight back. The vessels, sleek and nearly invisible to standard detection systems, were scattered throughout the graveyard, hidden in plain sight among the wreckage. For days they worked side by side, but their partnership was anything but smooth. Cade approached problems with military precision and direct force, the habits of a career soldier ingrained too deeply to abandon. Seraphina relied on subtlety and technology, the methods of someone who had survived by remaining unseen. "We need to break through this barrier," Cade insisted, pointing to a collapsed section of corridor, blocking their path to a crucial power coupling. He hefted a portable plasma cutter. "Cut straight through, establish a perimeter, secure the objective. Standard breach protocol." Seraphina shook her head. "Force is useless here. The structural integrity is compromised. You'll bring the whole section down on us." "We don't have time for caution," he argued, the soldier in him demanding efficiency over safety. Duty called for direct action, for the most expedient path to the objective. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she activated a small spider-like drone from a compartment in her armor. The mechanical arachnid skittered through a narrow gap in the debris, disappearing from sight. Moments later, the emergency systems on the other side deactivated, and a hidden maintenance door slid open. "Sometimes," she said quietly as she stepped through the doorway, "intelligence trumps strength." Cade said nothing, but silently acknowledged she was right. This was the conflict he now faced. between the certainty of military protocol and the adaptability required in this new reality, between the soldier he had been trained to be and the survivor he needed to become. This became their pattern: disagreement, tension, and reluctant respect when one approach proved superior. Slowly, they began to learn from each other, the rigid soldier learning flexibility, the lone survivor learning to trust. The phantom ship they selected was damaged but repairable, a hybrid of technologies that mirrored their unlikely alliance. He taught her about human engineering workarounds. She showed him the elegant efficiency of Xeon systems. When a section of hull unexpectedly collapsed during repairs, it was Cade's quick reflexes and strength that pulled Serafina to safety. Days later, when they triggered an ancient defense system, her technological expertise shut it down seconds before it would have incinerated them both. Searching for a necessary part, they stumbled upon the wreckage of his old squadron's transport. Inside, among the decayed remains, he found his best friend's dog tag. The metal was tarnished but still legible. Lieutenant Marcus Chen, serial number, blood type, religious preference. "I gave the order for that attack," Cade said, his voice hollow as he stared at the tag. "I led them to their deaths, believing the lies I was fed." The weight of duty had never felt heavier. He had fulfilled his orders, followed the chain of command, trusted in the mission, and it had led to this, a graveyard of ships and souls sacrificed for a lie. Serafina watched him from the doorway, her expression softening. She approached hesitantly, then reached into a hidden pocket in her armor. She withdrew a small, twisted piece of metal, a fragment of a human escape pod. "This was Sergeant Rivera's," she said quietly, "from your squadron. My Phantom intercepted the missile that damaged his pod, but the trajectory was already compromised. I couldn't stop his descent. I tracked his pod to the surface, but by the time I reached him..." She trailed off, her eyes distant with the memory. "He was the only one I got close to saving. I tried, Cade. For all of them." Cade stared at the fragment, then at her. "You were there? At the Battle of Helios Ridge?" She nodded. "I've been at more battles than you know. Always watching, always trying to minimize the casualties on both sides." "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The question was more than curiosity. It was about understanding a form of honor he had never considered, one that transcended sides in a conflict. "Because even in war, life matters," she answered simply. "Even when your enemy believes you're a monster." In her words, Cade heard an echo of a principle he had once held dear, before duty had narrowed his vision to mission parameters and enemy targets. The principle that a soldier's highest calling was to protect life, not merely to follow orders. That day, among the ghosts of the past, they ceased to be enemies. They became two survivors, bound by shared trauma and a common enemy. But more than that, they became partners in a new mission, one driven not by duty or vengeance, but by a higher purpose: justice. The Phantom ship was ready. A sleek, dart-like vessel with stealth capabilities that would make it invisible to most scanners. They had christened it Redemption, a name that held meaning for them both. As they made final preparations, Cade was struck by flashes of memory, fragments he hadn't recalled in centuries. The mission briefing before they'd come to Kerber 7. The commanding officer's face partially obscured in shadow. The Omnicorp logo on the datapad he'd been handed. The strangely specific orders: bring back proof of the ghost's existence, but eliminate all other evidence. Why would they need proof if they just wanted the ghost dead? The question had bothered him even then, but duty had overridden his concerns. Now, with the clarity of hindsight, he saw how his unquestioning obedience had been manipulated. "Something's wrong," he muttered, adjusting the navigation systems. "The mission, it never made sense." "What do you mean?" Serafina asked, looking up from her console. "My orders were contradictory," he explained, the realization forming as he spoke. "We were told to eliminate the ghost but bring back proof of existence. If we killed you, the proof would be your body. But the orders specifically required us to destroy all other evidence." He looked at her, understanding dawning. They weren't sending us to eliminate an enemy. They were sending us to eliminate evidence. Before she could respond, the ship's systems alerted them to an approaching vessel. Not just any vessel, a modern warship bearing the insignia of Omnigov, the evolution of Omnicorp after the war. "We need to use the Leviathan's launch bay," Serafina explained as they rushed to complete preparations. It's the only one intact enough to provide a clean exit. But as they powered up the Redemption's engines, the Leviathan systems turned against them. Doors that should have opened remained sealed. Lights switched from the cool blue of standard operation to the angry red of alert status. It's a trap, Cade realized, his tactical training kicking in. Someone's overridden the ship's systems. A holographic projection appeared before them, floating in the air like a malevolent ghost. A man in an immaculate military uniform, his face a study in cruel precision, and horrifyingly familiar to Cade. "Commander Vorlag," Cade whispered, recognition dawning. The man had been a junior officer during Cade's time, known for his ruthless efficiency and complete lack of moral boundaries. Cade had blocked his promotion twice for excessive force during civilian evacuations. The man's cold eyes now gleamed with triumphant malice. "Captain Cade," the hologram said, satisfaction evident in every syllable. "How wonderful to see you again after all these years. You haven't aged a day." His smile was shark-like. "How good of you to deliver yourself and the ghost to us." "You were the one who activated my pod," Cade said, the pieces falling into place. "This was never about finishing the war. This was about covering it up." "Very astute, Captain," Vorlag replied. "I always admired your intelligence, if not your tedious moral code. Did you think your awakening was an accident? We activated your pod. We knew the ghost would find you. You were the perfect bait." In that moment, Cade's understanding of duty underwent its final transformation. True duty wasn't blind obedience to orders or to a corrupt system. True duty was to justice, to truth, to protecting the innocent, even when that meant defying everything he had once believed in. A desperate chase through the ship graveyard began. They abandoned the Redemption, too vulnerable in its launch cradle, and fled on foot. Behind them, Vorlag's troops, faceless soldiers in sleek modern armor, pursued with relentless efficiency. Cade piloted and Seraphina hacked, turning the Leviathan's old defenses against their pursuers. Automated turrets, dormant for centuries, sprang to life at her command. Blast doors sealed, trapping squads of soldiers in corridors that would become their tombs. They managed to escape the Leviathan, but their options were limited. The graveyard, once their refuge, had become a killing ground. The only place to hide and repair was the flagship of the old human fleet, the Nemesis, a place Cade once served, a lifetime ago. "The Nemesis," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and determination. "If we can reach it, we might have a chance." The Nemesis loomed before them, a ghost of former glory. Unlike many of the ships in the graveyard, it was relatively intact, a testament to the engineering that had gone into its construction. As they approached, memories washed over Cade. He had walked these corridors, saluted on this bridge, fought and bled for this ship. "I know every bolt and circuit in her," Cade murmured as they approached. "I served as both tactical officer and engineering liaison on her. If there's one place we can make a stand, it's here." They slipped inside through a maintenance hatch, the familiar layout guiding Cade's steps even after 3 centuries. The ship was dark, its power systems long dormant, but they navigated by the light of Seraphina's tactical visor. On the bridge of the Nemesis, surrounded by holograms frozen 300 years in the past, faces of officers long dead, displays showing battles long concluded, Vorlag found them. His holographic image appeared on the main view screen, larger than life and filled with malice. "Captain Cade, I've waited so long for this moment." His voice dripped with triumph. "Your stubborn righteousness was always so inconvenient, blocking my promotions, questioning my methods. And now here you are, siding with the enemy." Cade's blood ran cold as the implications set in. His awakening, his hunt for the ghost, all orchestrated by Vorlag and whoever he represented. "Why?" Cade demanded. "What could you possibly want after all this time?" Vorlag's smile was a thin, cruel thing. "The war never ended, Captain. It just went underground. Omnicorp became Omnigov. We've been hunting the last of the Xeon for centuries, and now, thanks to you, we found her." He gave the order, and the purge teams began to board the Nemesis. The sound of cutting torches on the hull echoed through the ship like the wails of damned souls. The battle for the Nemesis was desperate. Cade didn't just use his knowledge of the ship's layout. He weaponized his understanding of the vessel's very design. This wasn't just his former posting. It was a ship he had helped maintain, whose flaws and quirks he knew intimately. "They're coming up through the port maintenance shafts," Cade said, studying a half-functional tactical display. "Just as I would have ordered." "We can't stop that many troops," Serafina replied, concern evident in her voice. A small smile played at the corner of Cade's mouth. "We don't have to fight them. We just have to let the ship do it for us." His fingers danced across the ancient controls with surprising familiarity. "During my time on the Nemesis, I documented 17 critical design flaws that were never addressed. The Admiralty deemed the fixes too costly during wartime. He accessed an engineering junction, where he quickly worked at a control panel. The Nemesis has a fundamental flaw in its coolant system," he explained as he worked. "The primary and secondary conduits run parallel for nearly 30 meters in Section 42B, with only a single isolation valve between them. With practiced hands, he rerouted the flow to a set of secondary pipes, then fired his sidearm at a specific junction. Supercooled liquid burst forth, instantly freezing the corridor where Vorlag's troops were advancing. The pursuing soldiers, caught in the spray, were transformed into macabre ice sculptures. 1 down, Cade said, his expression grim but satisfied. 16 to go. In another section, he disabled the artificial gravity in a specific module. When Vorlag's troops entered, they found themselves suddenly floating, disoriented and vulnerable. Serafina's drones picked them off with surgical precision. The gravity systems were patched rather than properly repaired after the Battle of Arcturus, he explained. They installed manual overrides that bypassed the safety protocols. I wrote the report on it myself. When a squad of heavily armored shock troops approached the bridge, Cade led them on a chase through what appeared to be a dead end. As they followed, he activated a hidden control panel. The Nemesis had a design quirk, he said to Serafina through their comlink. The emergency bulkheads in sections 18 through 22 were installed backward. When they deploy, they leave a 6-inch gap at the bottom, not enough for a person, but perfect for... He tossed a small canister through the gap just as the bulkhead slammed shut. The muffled sounds of coughing, followed by silence, told the rest of the story. Sleeping gas, he explained. Standard issue, still potent after all these years. How did you know that would work after 3 centuries? Serafina asked as they sealed the section behind them. Because I wrote the report on that vulnerability too, he replied with grim satisfaction, and the Admiralty filed it away as non-critical. Serafina patched into the ship's weapon systems, directed what firepower they had with surgical precision. But there were too many enemies. Vorlag had brought an army, and they were just 2. They were pushed back corridor by corridor, room by room, until they stood on the bridge. The doors were sealed. It was the last line of defense. Through the viewports, they could see Vorlag's flagship in low orbit, a sleek, predatory shape against the stars. Smaller vessels, dropships and fighters, swarmed around it like angry insects. Their flagship is in low orbit. If I direct all the phantoms to it, I can destroy it, Serafina said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. She stood at a console, her hands moving with blinding speed as she interfaced with her network of hidden ships. But the feedback, it will kill you, Cade realized, seeing the determination in her eyes. The neural interface that allowed her to control the Phantom fleet was a double-edged sword. Using it at such intensity would burn out her neural pathways. It is a worthy price, and she replied, not looking up from her work. My people will be avenged, and you will live. Cade watched as she prepared for her final attack. The door to the bridge shuddered under the assault of Vorlag's troops. They had minutes, perhaps less. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just an ally, but someone who had carried the weight of her people's destruction alone for centuries. Someone who had protected him, guided him, saved him, and now she was prepared to die for a cause that had once been only hers, but had become theirs. In that moment, Elena's face flashed before his eyes. Her smile, her voice, her final words cut short by static. The memory of her death, once a spurt of vengeance, now became something else. A reminder of loss, of sacrifice, of the cost of war. He couldn't lose someone else to this conflict built on lies. No, he whispered, then louder. No. You're not dying alone, he yelled, breaking into a sprint toward the emergency access hatch that led to the ship's lower decks. Cade, what are you doing? Serafina called after him, confusion and alarm in her voice. "It's my duty, Cade," she cried. "Let me end this." "No," he roared back, his voice carrying the weight of his conviction. "Your duty is to live. Mine is to give you that chance." He raced through the Nemesis's service tunnels, memory guiding his steps where light failed. He knew the old reactor was unstable. After 3 centuries without maintenance, it was a miracle it hadn't already detonated. Now, that instability would be their salvation. He reached the reactor core, a massive, spherical chamber dominated by the pulsing heart of the ship's power system. Cooling rods designed to prevent overload hung suspended in a dance of controlled chaos. Cade approached the main control panel and initiated the overload protocol. Warning klaxons blared. The ship's automated voice, distorted by time and damage, announced the imminent reactor breach. Cade ignored it all, focused on the task at hand. The override codes memorized during his service on the Nemesis came back to him as if no time had passed at all. As he worked, he thought of Elena, of his squadron, of all those who had died in a war manufactured by greed. He thought of Serafina, carrying the burden of her people's extinction for 3 centuries. He thought of duty and honor, and how sometimes the highest duty was to defy orders for the sake of what was right. "Cade, no!" Serafina's voice came through his helmet comm, understanding dawning in her tone. The EMP blast from the reactor overload would wipe out all electronics across the planet. It would destroy the Purge fleet, but also her helmet, her Phantom fleet, the very technology that was her power and her curse. He raced back through the service tunnels, back to the bridge where Serafina waited. The doors were breached. Vorlag's troops were pouring onto the bridge, weapons raised. Without hesitation, Cade grabbed Serafina's arm and dragged her toward an emergency exit. An old chemical-fueled buggy in the hangar bay adjacent to the bridge. A relic, but one that would survive the EMP. "What have you done?" she demanded as he shoved her into the vehicle. "Given us a future," he replied, jumping in beside her and punching the ignition. The buggy roared to life, its ancient engines spitting and coughing before settling into a steady rumble. They tore out of the hangar bay as the first waves of energy began to emanate from the Nemesis's core. Behind them, Vorlag's troops realized the danger too late. Their screams were cut short as the wave engulfed them. A second before the blast reached its peak, their buggy launched from the ship, sailing through the void between the Nemesis and the nearest derelict. They landed hard, the impact jarring every bone in their bodies, but the buggy's rugged frame held. Then it happened. A giant silent wave expanded across Kerber 7. All technology died. Ships like giant dead birds fell from the sky. Vorlag's flagship, caught in the wave, plummeted to the planet's surface, a meteor of metal and fire. Serafina's helmet went dark. The neural interface that had been part of her for centuries, the connection to her Phantom fleet, to the very technology that had defined her existence, was gone. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the crackle of cooling metal and the distant impacts of falling ships, Cade moved to remove the now useless helmet from her head. She instinctively raised her hands, covering the faceplate, as if afraid to show her vulnerability. For 3 centuries, the helmet had been her armor against the world, her identity, her purpose. Without it, who was she? Cade gently took her wrists, moving her hands away with tender determination. The gesture spoke volumes. "Trust me, you're safe now. You don't need to hide anymore." The helmet came free, revealing her face. Not to an enemy, not to a target, but to a companion who had seen her soul. Beneath it was the face of a young, tired woman, her eyes filled with tears. Tears not of grief, but of relief. She was free. The weight of centuries, of being the last of her kind, of carrying the burden of revenge, had been lifted. "It's over," Cade said, his voice soft in the new quiet of Kerber 7. "Vorlag, Omnicorp, Omnigav, whatever they called themselves. They're gone." Serafina nodded, reaching up to touch her face, to feel the air on her skin without the barrier of her helmet for the first time in memory. "What do we do now?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them. "We survive," Cade replied, a small smile forming on his lips. "We live." Weeks passed. They were the only 2 survivors on a planet of dead technology. But they weren't merely surviving. They were building something new. Their shelter began as a simple structure in the hollow of a downed cruiser, but it evolved with each passing day. Cade's engineering knowledge transformed scavenged parts into practical systems. A water filtration unit made from life support components, a small forge fashioned from an engine housing where they could melt and reshape metal. Serafina brought her own knowledge to their home. A small hydroponic system grew edible algae and simple plants, using techniques her people had perfected for space travel. Together, they created something that was neither human nor Zeon, but a blend of both cultures. They sat by a fire, but it wasn't just any fire. It burned in a small stove that Cade had constructed from the reactor shielding of a scout ship. The efficient design provided warmth with minimal fuel, illuminating their shelter with a golden glow. Nearby, in a container that had once held ammunition for a long, silent weapon, grew a small blue flower, delicate and luminescent, with petals that seemed to capture and hold the light. Serafina tended it with reverent care. "I never thought I'd see one again," she said, gently touching one of the petals. "They were common on my homeworld. This seed was in a preservation chamber in my helmet, a memory I kept with me all these years." Cade watched her care for the plant, this small miracle that had survived 3 centuries of war. "What's it called?" he asked. "In my language it translates to remembrance," she replied, "but perhaps now it could mean something else. Renewal, maybe." The graveyard, once a monument to war, had become their canvas. They scavenged materials from the ships, learned to hunt the small, hardy creatures that had adapted to life among the ruins, found ways to coax life from the metallic soil. They weren't just existing. They were creating a future from the fragments of the past. Above them, stars shone with a clarity undimmed by artificial light. The 300-year war was finally, truly over. "What now, Captain?" Serafina asked, seeing his smile in person, not on a tactical display, for the first time. Her own lips curved upward in response, a mirror to his expression. He looked at her real face bathed in the firelight, at her vulnerability and her strength. The blue glow of the flower cast soft shadows across her features, highlighting the silver markings that traced her cheekbones. In her, he saw not an enemy, not an alien, but a companion. Someone who understood loss as he did. Someone who had fought as he had. Someone who could build a future with him. She was no longer the ghost, and he was no longer a soldier. They were simply a man and a woman on a planet that had given them a second chance. "Now," he answered, reaching out to take her hand in his. For the first time in 300 years, Cade felt not the bone-deep cold of his awakening, but warmth spreading through his chest. "We begin to live,"